Thank you very much. And the first speaker this morning, Pierre Vimont, said that diplomats are taught to be gentle and polite. As a former Minister of Finance myself, I have learned to be pragmatic and direct. And in the 7 minutes or less that I have been allotted, I'll try to do that. There are 4 areas that I would like for all of us to keep in mind. 1 is human beings. 2, private sector job creation. 3, concrete projects. And 4th, be able to measure results. So when we talk about the initiative of the Atlantic community, we need to keep in mind that the reason is not to have a nice meeting of former or current politicians or people from NGOs or the private sector just to talk, but rather, and I think that should be the focus of this, is to actually find the best ways possible to create opportunities for its citizens. In other words, let's keep people in the center of our conversations. This is not about bureaucracies reinventing themselves, but rather about removing obstacles that allow people to take destiny into their own hands. And with that in mind, I think what we have heard, plus a couple of things we have not heard yet, about the major trends and challenges to keep in mind, I will submit to you that they are a weakening leadership around the world, a loss of trust between the individual and whatever system the individual is living on, an ideologic, cultural, and social division that I haven't seen since the 60s, and I was born in 63, so I was very young when I saw that kind of social divisions. We are 7 billion people, and sometimes when we speak about that, we see that as a problem. I see that as a fantastic opportunity. Each human being has the ability to produce more than what he or she can consume, so I don't see that as a problem. What I do see as a problem is that we have 1.2 billion people living with less than $1.25 a day, and that half of the population that can work do not have a job. Urbanization is becoming a challenge. About 70% of the population of the world in the next 20 years will live in cities. That same amount of people will be within 100 kilometers of the coast, and that presents problems when we are talking about climate change. And population shifts are also taking place. Someone mentioned this morning terrorism, drugs, and I will add gangs. So that's a little bit of the major trends and challenges we currently face. Now, we are facing these challenges in a global theater that in itself has significant problems. First, the US, which many believe is falling into the cliff. I would argue that while that might be the case, the United States continue to have the right principles in place, mainly or primarily based in its judicial system. And that is what I think is gonna keep them going at least for a generation, maybe 2 more. Europe, some will argue, is in the hole, and without the structural reforms in the radar screen. I would agree with the previous speaker that while this might be the case, if they come out, they are likely to come out stronger, and inshallah, that will be the case. And the third is China, which in the next 10 years, some argue will lead the world in terms of its economic power, but with several domestic challenges, not the least the current ones with Japan. Now, how do we bring all of this to these areas of concern, to opportunities that are down to earth and to the people that we should keep in mind, which are those less fortunate? I would argue that food security, water, energy security, and being able to adapt to the effects of climate change are the most relevant ones. And so what about all of this for the Atlantic? Well, I think that if we were to agree that private sector-led job creation is the right way to go, because job creation creates wealth, which is the best tool for people to become more resilient to all of the challenges that I just listed. What can we do then as part of the economic agenda to remove the obstacles that are not allowing for this job creation to take place? So I would argue that we need to minimize regulation and maximize competition. I heard someone this morning talk about the model being broken. Well, I would ask, which model are we talking about? Because 70% of the world has had an interventionist model, and only 30% of the world has actually had a capitalist model. So which model are we talking about when we talk about a broken model? If we minimize regulation and maximize competition, the private sector will invest, and the jobs will be created. If we firmly believe that it is better to have an imperfect market than a perfect bureaucrat telling us what to do, I think the Atlantic, and for that matter, the world will be better off. I think we need to take into account, especially when we want to bring the most vulnerable into the picture, the aspects of social media, which are extremely important for the exchange of knowledge, but also for people to actually be better informed and make better decisions. So concretely, for the Atlantic, I like to submit to you, and this morning someone talked a little bit about this. I think that we need to think in terms of sub-regions, a smaller size of the pie, whether we take CAFTA, Central America and the Caribbean with the US, or NAFTA, the northern part of the US, or if we take agreements, trade agreements that currently exist in some African countries, or if we take the exercise of the part of the Union of the Mediterranean, I think that has a better chance than thinking of a big, large community without concrete projects, which is the second aspect. I think we need to have very concrete private sector-led projects. We did that in Central America. Central America kept on trying to become one region. And when I used to be in government for 12 years, we used to have meetings like this, and out of these meetings there will be a nice summary, and then another summary of the summary, and so on. When the private sector did projects in telecommunication, electricity, ports, and airports, the real integration took place. So instead of thinking about the next agenda for our meetings, we should be thinking about the next 3 projects that in the next 3 years can take place with a role of the government or of exclusively removing the obstacles that impede projects to take place, for example, in water, energy, and food. And I will give ourselves 3 years to see those projects actually take place. Finally, it is very important to measure what matters. If we don't have metrics, if we don't have a way of actually seeing if the needle is actually moving in the right direction, we will never know if we are making progress or not. Thank you very much.